About 500 years ago, Henry VIII sent a letter here to Hever Castle. It was a love letter to Anne Boleyn, professing his devotion and asking her to become his mistress. Over the next 2 years, Henry continued to send letters to Anne at Hever. And although we don't have Anne's replies, Henry's letters offer an intimate glimpse into their developing relationship, a relationship that would ultimately lead to the annulment of the king's first marriage and the break with Rome. We can only speculate how Anne herself was feeling throughout this time. Anxious, excited at all these letters and gifts and offers arriving from the king. And what of her family? How did they view this courtship? Were they thirsty for power or hoping it would all quietly subside? To understand more about what led to this pivotal relationship, I've come to Hever Castle, one of my favourite historic sites and the setting for my new novel. It was home to the Boleyns for 3 generations and the place where Anne Boleyn grew up. Hever Castle dates from the 14th century and the Boleyns took it over in the 15th century. Geoffrey Boleyn was Anne's great-grandfather and he rose from being a wealthy mercer to Lord Mayor of London. He bought Hever in 1462. Well, Geoffrey, his son William and grandson Thomas set about transforming the medieval castle you can see behind me into a refined Tudor residence. They also transformed the Boleyn name into one of enormous significance. Thomas Boleyn, Anne's father, is sometimes thought of as an ambitious, scheming man, the architect of Anne's rise to power. But is this reputation fair? I'm going to speak to Hever Curator Kate McCaffrey to hear more. Hi Kate, lovely to see you.
Hello Tracy, lovely to see you.
Well, here we are in beautiful Hever, and the Boleyns settled here in about 1505, didn't they, when Thomas inherited the castle from his father William. Can you tell me a bit about what Thomas did to Hever once he'd inherited it?
Well, Thomas made a few key renovations to the castle. He sort of built on the renovations started by his grandfather, Geoffrey Boleyn, when he bought the estate in 1462. And it was really about moving away from that kind of medieval, open plan, communal living to a more kind of private living that the Tudors loved so much. So sort of smaller rooms, smaller access to those rooms, which was really important. So, for example, Thomas extended from the parlour that his grandfather had built downstairs and added the spiral staircase that you walk up to get to the private suite of family rooms. So it was all about access, but privacy, modernity. He made it really a comfortable family home for his young brood.
Absolutely, and you really sense that it was a family home, even though there are, I think, 3 portcullises going back to its early life as a fortress, as a castle. Now it's much more about comfort and luxury. And Thomas himself is a man on the rise, isn't he, at this stage? Can you tell me about him?
Yes, so Thomas, by this stage, he's already been successful in his career. You know, by 1505, he's in the service of Henry VII, and he's actually an esquire of the body, which is quite an important position close to the king. And in 1509, just a few years later, at Henry VIII's coronation, he's knighted. So he really does start to rise to prominence, mainly during Henry VIII's reign. He's a very skilled linguist, he becomes an important ambassador, diplomat, and Hever is the perfect place for him to base himself because it's equidistant between the coast, where he's crossing the channel to go to his embassies, but also, of course, London, where he's at court.
It's all about location, isn't it? I love that.
It really is.
Well, Thomas is often presented as a very ambitious father who pushes his daughter Anne into the king's path for his own gain. Do you think that's fair?
I don't think that Thomas deserves the somewhat villainous reputation that he has gained in, I think, scholarship and popular culture over the years. I actually think he was ambitious, he was ruthless, But you had to be in that era, and you had to be to succeed at Henry's court. Anne was the same. So I don't think that we can judge him based on that. I think he did have a close relationship with his children, and I think he saw something clearly in Anne, particularly a brightness and a spark, and I think he knew she would succeed. So he pushes her, yes, but I don't know if that's beyond the ordinary at that time.
He certainly seems to spot the potential in Anne, doesn't he? He describes her as exceptionally toward. You know, she stands out as being quite a precocious child, doesn't she?
Absolutely, and I think he admires that and respects that and sort of wants to nurture that and see her flourish, which of course she does.
Well, the million-dollar question for scholars of Anne Boleyn: when was she born? Because estimates range from 1501 to 1507. What's your opinion?
Yes, you're right. There's still a really sort of ferocious debate, I think, ongoing in scholarship about Anne's birth date. I tend to go with, I think the majority at this time of historians would sort of go with the earlier date, so around 1501, which means Anne would have been a young girl when she moved here to Hever. So she likely wasn't born here, if that is her birth date. She would have been born at Blickling Hall in Norfolk, which was another of Thomas Boleyn's sort of property portfolio.
Because they were a Norfolk family originally, weren't they?
They really were, and sort of this is the first time that Thomas really makes this his sort of seat, his main seat, both for comfort and access to his various workplaces.
And you, as you say, it's because of the location primarily. It's very, very handy for the court, but also for Dover, for his many missions overseas on Henry's behalf. So describe this room. Where exactly are we in Hever?
So we are standing in the Boleyns' great chamber, and this was the very heart of their family home. This is the central room in that suite of private family apartments, and this is where they would have privately dined, where they would have entertained, but in the daytime they would have read here, conversed, perhaps taken lessons. So you can just imagine the kinds of conversations these walls have overheard, you know, really history-changing conversations.
Absolutely. This is where they came to, you can imagine, plan and plot, sometimes lick their wounds if things were going badly at court. Yes. It was a haven, wasn't it, for the Boleyns?
It was a real haven and a retreat, you know, somewhat from the prying eyes of court.
Well, just beyond that doorway there, we have the bedchamber that's thought to have been used by Anne and her sister Mary. What do you think life was like for the Boleyn children growing up here at Hever?
I would like to think life for the Boleyn children was quite free here, quite sort of carefree as well. You know, you can just imagine them running around these spaces, running around the grounds. It was a real safe haven for them, as you say, but sort of surrounded by the beautiful Wealden countryside. I think it was a very special place for them to grow up. And of course, it's where they would have had their early education, overseen probably by their mother, Elizabeth. And this is really where they would have started to thrive and to grow so close. We know that they were all very close as siblings. So it's lovely to imagine those formative years taking space here.
And I think Hever always held a special place in Anne's heart in particular.
Very much so. She returns here a lot, and so it clearly was a place of importance for all of the Boleyns, I think.
Also living here at Hever with the family was Anne's grandmother, Lady Margaret Butler. Margaret grew up at Kilkenny Castle in Ireland, the co-heiress to the Earl of Ormond, and a vast estate. This made her one of the greatest heiresses in Europe. Around 1469, she married William Boleyn, and it was a marriage beneath her station. The Butlers were as noble as you could get in Ireland, and the Boleyn family consequently owed much of their prestige to Margaret's birthright. Margaret undoubtedly instilled in her son Thomas and his children a sense of worthiness and pride of their heritage. When Anne's heraldry was created, it was the Butler line alongside her mother's Howard line that were represented. But Margaret's impressive life would end somewhat tragically. She was suddenly declared insane in 1518. It was likely what we would now recognise as dementia. Margaret was a formidable and highly educated woman, and she influenced the beliefs and values of the household here at Hever. Education was seen as the route to status and social advancement. Margaret's son Thomas believed equally in the power of a good education. Well, he was a humanist, which meant he believed in the education of girls as well as of boys. It's possible his son George was sent to Oxford for a time, while his daughters Mary and Anne were educated here at Hever. George and Anne were both particularly talented in languages. Well, there's no way that Thomas could have known that his daughter Anne would one day be queen, but nevertheless, he realised that in order to carve out an influential position for his daughter, she needed to have a good education. It was through Thomas's connections as an ambassador in the Low Countries that Anne secured a position as a maid of honour for Margaret of Austria, perhaps one of the most sophisticated courts in Europe, an experience that would shape her person and influence the course of her life. It's here that she would achieve her fluency in French and develop an appreciation of art and culture. After around a year with Margaret of Austria, Anne was called away from Margaret's court as she had been selected to serve Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister, recently married to the King of France. Both Anne and her sister Mary entered Mary Tudor's court. However, the French king died very soon after the marriage, and Mary Boleyn was recalled home to England. Anne stayed on as one of Queen Claude's attendants for another 7 years. Queen Claude was a very pious woman and a great patron of the arts. She was particularly fond of illuminated manuscripts. Her court was a lively centre of culture and learning, as well as music and dancing. Well, Anne Boleyn was also deeply pious, and her religious views were no doubt very much influenced by the women she spent time with during her formative years in France. Here at Hever, there are 2 books of hours that belonged to Anne Boleyn. This one is the earliest. It dates from around 1425, and excitingly, Anne has actually inscribed it herself. There's a depiction of the Last Judgment, underneath which Anne has written Le temps viendra, or the time will come, and she's drawn an astrolabe, or armillary sphere, which was a measurement of time. Well, also excitingly, the other Book of Hours, which is usually in this case here, is currently on loan to us at historic royal palaces and on display at Hampton Court Palace. That book dates from 1528, the year that Anne almost died from the sweating sickness, and she's inscribed that one too with the words, "Remember me when you do pray, that hope doth lead from day to day." In around 1521 or 1522, Anne was recalled home from France. A marriage had been arranged for her, certainly not to Henry VIII. She was to marry James Butler, the son of Thomas Boleyn's cousin. While Anne was away in France, a dispute had broken out over the inheritance of the title of Earl of Ormond between Thomas Boleyn and his Irish cousin. The match between Anne and James, coordinated by Cardinal Wolsey, was intended to resolve the dispute and maintain peace in Ireland. In around 1521 or 1522, Anne left France for England. We cannot imagine how she would have felt leaving the French court and the position she'd held for the last 7 years, with the prospect of living the rest of her life in Ireland. But despite negotiations, the marriage was never finalised for reasons that remain unclear. Anne remained in England, and another position was offered to her. She joined the retinue of Catherine of Aragon. We know that she was at court by March 1522 because she played the part of Perseverance at the Chateau Vert pageant for Henry VIII at York Place, acting alongside both her siblings, Mary and George. Around this time, Thomas Boleyn was appointed treasurer of the royal household. The Boleyns were well established in the Tudor court. But after just a couple of years, Anne returned once again to Hever Castle in 1523. She had become betrothed to someone else, and this time it was of her own choosing, Henry Percy, son of the 5th Earl of Northumberland. But the relationship was abruptly cut short. Hi Owen, lovely
Hello.
to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you.
Well, we're in one of my favourite rooms in Hever Castle. Can you tell me a bit about it?
Yeah, so we're located in the best bedchamber at Hever, and this is almost certainly where Thomas and Elizabeth Boleyn would have slept, and later we believe that Anne may have resided in this bedroom too.
Really?
Yeah.
And you can see why it is the best bedchamber. It's absolutely beautiful with views on two sides overlooking the moat. It really evokes the time of Anne Boleyn, doesn't it, here?
It really does. This is very much the premier side of the castle where the family reside.
So let's go back to 1523. Anne is sent back to Hever, probably to get her away from Henry Percy, who she'd been hoping to marry. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We don't know a great deal about the relationship. What we do know comes from Cavendish, Wolsey's gentleman usher. And we believe that Anne might have been exerting some agency here in finding her own love match with Henry Percy. This is thwarted. Wolsey believes that Anne is not high enough in status, and she is sent rather in disgrace here to Hever. And Cavendish says that she smoked here, she fumed.
Oh, I love that image. Fantastic. But is that correct? Do you think Anne really was aiming too high in Henry Percy?
That's a really, really good question. And actually, when we look at Thomas Boleyn's status, he is the heir apparent to the earldom of Ormond. It is a contested title. So had it not been contested, I think there would have been no question that Anne was high enough in status to marry Henry Percy. But there was that question mark, I think, over the earldom.
So Wolsey sort of had a point. But what about Anne? Do you think she loved Henry Percy, or was she just playing more of a political game?
I think perhaps a bit of both. I mean, I think the fact that we know how furious she was that her love match had been broken off would suggest that it was perhaps predicated on a degree of affection. And in the 16th century, love is a desired outcome for a marriage, but it's rarely the foundation for it. So yes, we're seeing the second sort of proposed marriage for Anne, and yet again it fails.
But Henry Percy is not the only suitor for Anne, is he? And there's more of a local boy in the form of Thomas White. Can you tell me a bit about him and Anne?
Yeah, absolutely. So he is a diplomat at Henry's court. He's a French speaker, just like Anne, and he is also a poet. And he resided just 15 miles away from here at Allington Castle, which is sort of a twin for Hever, just slightly larger. We don't know Anne's feelings for Thomas Wyatt, but we can almost certainly tell that Thomas is absolutely enamoured by her. He writes several poems which are clearly referring to Anne, but he's married. So yes, there is obviously a deep affection for Anne from many quarters.
She seems to have just that undefinable allure, doesn't she? She spent time in France. She's set apart from the other ladies of the English court. She's quite sophisticated, isn't she?
She really is. And I think it is about her inner qualities, her charisma, her wit, her intelligence, her ability to command a room that really leaves an impression on people. She really manages to get under people's skin, whether for good or bad.
Well, of course, the person whose skin she really gets under is King Henry VIII. Now, we know a lot about his feelings for Anne, thanks to those love letters, don't we?
We do, yeah.
So how many are we talking?
So 17 letters survive in the Vatican archives, and we know at least 4 of them were sent here to Hever.
That's exciting. So Anne might have actually been in this room reading Henry's letters.
I think it's very likely that she read them here, which is incredible especially when you read those letters and understand the significance of them. It really makes this space feel quite charged.
Yes, it does. You can just imagine it here in the best bedchamber. And what sort of things is Henry saying to Anne?
Well, some of them are quite steamy. They're not for public viewing, shall we say. He's imagining being in her arms. He refers to her breasts on occasion. But most importantly, I think we should recognise these, as Natalie Gruninger does, as a transactional affair. Yes, they talk of love, but it's also about future plans and whether Anne is interested in being a part of that future.
Okay, so they're not just flowery sentiments, there's a real purpose behind them. Is she as serious about him as he is about her? And I think that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because we don't have any of Anne's letters to Henry, sadly, unless you've got them somewhere in an attic here at Hever, hidden away behind the panelling. So what do you personally think that Anne felt about Henry?
It is so difficult to say in lieu of those letters. I would love to find them one day.
Me too.
I think that our best clue is a dual inscription in a book of hours that Henry and Anne wrote to each other. Henry talks about his longing and pains of love for her under an image of the Man of Sorrows. And Anne, under an image of the Annunciation, talks about being loving and kind to him. Loving isn't necessarily the same thing as love. So I think Anne was a politician.
Yeah.
She had grown up in a diplomat's house. She had seen how politics works in different courts. I think she understood that he was serious, and I think she made an important decision for her family. Was there love involved? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I get the same impression. It's a considered move rather than one of passion and longing, which seems to have been driving Henry on. And of course, the need for a son, which is all important in their relationship. Well, 1527, things change a little bit, don't they? And Henry ups the ante in one of his letters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He makes a proposal of marriage. And this is something that Anne must have known was coming, but I don't think other people were anticipating it, because typically Henry had mistresses and then moved on. He had done that with Mary Boleyn. But Anne does accept that proposal of marriage. She sends him a bejewelled ship as a token of acceptance. It's her way of saying, I will brave the rough storms ahead with you and voyage to matrimony. And it is going to be a bumpy ride.
You can say that again. And what about Anne's family here at Hever? What did they make of Henry's courtship of Anne?
Well, I think there must have been some degree of excitement, but also hesitation and maybe even fear, because this is unprecedented. They've seen what happened to Mary. She doesn't get much out of the relationship that she had with Henry. And actually, we do have fairly good evidence that Thomas Boleyn, rather than being this pushy father, is quite hesitant in the equation. We hear this from Thomas Howard, who tells Chapuis that they are almost against the marriage. They're hesitant and fearful about the future, because it does put everything on the table. It's one hell of a gamble.
It really is. And that's when I think that Hever becomes a refuge. You sense Thomas bringing Anne back here for her protection, not just to play hard to get, as is often seen. She wants to be here in her beloved home, and none of them are entirely sure that this is the best thing for her, to be courted by the King of England.
No, absolutely. And we actually see this in the love letters. Henry complains and believes that Thomas is keeping Anne from him. So, yes, I mean, this is certainly a refuge, but one that's also a bit of a pressure cooker.
And this is where Anne comes back again in 1528, this time to be quarantined because the sweating sickness is raging in London. And in fact, Anne catches it, doesn't she?
She does. It breaks out in her household. She comes here to Hever with Thomas, her father, and both of them are taken very, very badly ill. This is a really virulent disease. It can take people in a day, and both of them suffer greatly.
And what does Henry do about it? He must have been frantic.
Absolutely. One of the letters that he sends here to Hever is absolutely marked with concern. You can see it in his handwriting, and he sends his second best doctor, Dr. Butts, to serve Anne and to get her better.
Second best.
Second best, but his first is absent. Okay. So it is quite a gesture for a hypochondriac like Henry. But yes, he does treat them, and they do survive. Not so much William Carey, Mary Boleyn's husband, who tragically dies.
It is one of the deadliest diseases of the age, isn't it? Well, Henry must have been overjoyed, of course, when his true love recovers and the courtship continues. Do we know if he courted her here at Hever?
Such a great question. I think it's almost certain, though undocumented, that he must have made some kind of visit at some point. Hever just is a family home. There's very little space to court a king. So if he does visit, he's almost certainly residing at Penshurst, which is his property. It's far more palatial, and I'm sure that sort of day visits were made in secret.
Yeah, it's very close by, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, okay. Well, I like to think he was here, perhaps even in this very room, who knows. But you've really evoked the world of the Boleyns at Hever, so thank you, Owen.
A pleasure.
Anne's last recorded stay here at Hever was in 1529. A few years later, Henry VIII secured his annulment and married Anne in 1533. But things turned sour in just 3 short years. The demise of the Boleyn family was swift and tragic. Although Mary escaped the axe, she was exiled from court and estranged from her family. Elizabeth Boleyn died just 2 years after her children's executions. Thomas Boleyn, having lost all his titles and money, died here at Hever the following year in 1539. In the end, only Anne's grandmother remained. Lady Margaret Butler was the last of the Boleyns to live at Hever, but she died shortly after her son Thomas, having lived all the way up into her early 80s. After the downfall of the Boleyn family, Hever continued to play an important role in Tudor politics. Henry VIII gifted it to his 4th wife, Anne of Cleves, after the annulment of their short marriage. But it's Hever's association with the Boleyns that's the castle's greatest legacy, owing to the integral part that it played in the dramatic story of one of English history's most fascinating families.